Hi everyone. Welcome to the 9th Sankalp Africa Summit 2022. My name is Niharika Agarwal and I work with the Gender and Livelihoods team at Intellicap. Thank you so much for joining us today for this session. I hope you've had an exciting day one at Sankalp and have been able to meet some like-minded people. This session is directly informed by our ongoing work with IDRC, which is the International Development Research Center Canada, on working towards reorienting the private sector to enable climate smart agricultural solutions to address gender inequalities. I would like to thank IDRC for giving us the opportunity to undertake this work. As we heard yesterday, that any impact needs to be intentional and strategic and has to be incorporated into the business from the initiation phase. On the same lines, this initiative with IDRC is looking to support 10 private sector enterprises working at the nexus of climate and agriculture to help them advance gender inclusion and impact. Agriculture, as we know, is one of the most important sectors for the economic development of East Africa, contributing to more than 30% of its GDP and over 65% of the employment in the region. However, climate change has had a disproportionate impact on the sector. The region already struggles with recurrent droughts, floods, erratic rain patterns, and other fluctuations that impact crop production. Climate change is expected to increase this pressure on agricultural development, given that 75% of it is rain fed in the region and it is highly vulnerable to changing climatic patterns. Since women account for a vast majority of the existing agricultural workforce in the region, they are also disproportionately impacted by adverse effects of climate change on agriculture productivity. In addition, women have limited access to resources, which makes them even more susceptible to food insecurity in the event of adverse climate events. As efforts are being undertaken to reduce the carbon intensity of the sector, it is critical to ensure that it is done in a way that food security for low-income populations is not affected. The private sector can be a core contributor to scaling up climate-smart innovations and assist in transitioning to a low-carbon economy in the region, while also embedding gender transformative considerations in business models. Now, just before we jump into the session, I would like to go over a few housekeeping rules. I request all the participants to kindly keep themselves on mute. If you have questions at any point of time, please write them in the chat box and we will take them up, time permitting, during the Q&A towards the end of the session. If you wish to engage with any of the panelists individually, you will be able to schedule meetings with them one-on-one on Brella after the session. We have budgeted 45 minutes for the panel discussion with our speakers, during which they will share their perspectives on the linkages between climate, gender, and agriculture, and on the potential role of agriculture enterprises in advancing women's empowerment. After the panel discussion, we will go into breakout rooms to hear views from the larger audience on the specific areas emerging from the discussion. And with that, I will now hand it over to our moderator, Amar Gokhale. Amar is also part of the Gender and Livelihoods team at Intellicap and has worked extensively on the topic of gender mainstreaming and gender lens investing. Over to you, Amar.
Thanks, Niharika. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, wherever you're joining us from. My name is Amar Gokhale, and as Niharika said, I'm part of the Gender and Livelihoods team at Intellicap. Welcome to Sankalp. The importance of interconnectedness, transformational change, and on-ground action has been emphasized repeatedly since yesterday. And these themes are especially relevant to the efforts towards gender mainstreaming and achieving SDG 5. We at Intellicap are committed to this goal, and I would like to once again thank IDRC for supporting our work in this field. Now, this particular session really seeks to foreground the conversation about gender mainstreaming in the sectors of sustainable agriculture and clean energy. Niharika already spoke earlier about how this overlap is critical for the continent, and this session aims to explore the role that private sector enterprises can take in furthering women's empowerment, with a low carbon consideration in mind, given that climate change has become an imperative for all of us, which we need to account for. Women and children are often most vulnerable to climate change, and ensuring that these sectors have a focus on women can contribute to building the resilience. The private sector, of course, has a role to play. And indeed, businesses have much to gain from an orientation towards gender inclusivity. Not only do gender diverse businesses, and I refer to businesses that are gender diverse, not only in their operations, but also in their customer base and value chains. So not only are such businesses more profitable, they report other benefits as well, such as higher productivity, improved ability to attract talent, greater creativity, innovation, openness, and a better ability to gauge consumer interest. And we have a stellar panel here today with panelists having direct experience in operating, supporting, or investing in companies that are gender forward or are looking to be gender forward. And our panelists can really speak to the associated benefits. I'll quickly introduce our panelists now in no particular order. We have Agnes Manthi, Business Development Manager at Root Capital. We have Lucy Plushke, who's with the WE4F Innovation Hub for East Africa at GIZ. We have Dorcas Asimwe, co-founder at Farm Kiosk. And we are supposed to have Elizabeth Maloba, co-founder at Nahari. However, she will either be late or unable to join us because of some unforeseen circumstances. We'll wait for her, but we can start in the meanwhile. Thank you to our panelists for making the time today. And to start us off, I will request Lucy to share her thoughts on how this nexus of climate change and sustainable agriculture is really critical, and how it has gained interest, and maybe share a little bit about WE4F's role working at this nexus.
Thank you, and good morning from Kenya. Appropriately, I am in fact in Kenya. Yes, so I think it's no secret that there is increasing pressure on our food systems from demographic changes, from population growth, from urbanization, which means we have to produce more food for more people with less resources, be it land, soil, water, energy. And so the agricultural system is anyways under pressure to remain productive and sustainable. And then we add climate change to the equation. And if we look at the 6th IPCC report that just came out, we can see there is significant challenges ahead, but we already see them now. Last year, we had locust invasions all over the Horn of Africa and northern East Africa. This year, we have drought, devastating drought in the northern and eastern parts of the region. And it really is a question of global food and water security at this point. And then, of course, agriculture is a key contributor to all of this. Agriculture emits during production, during processing, during transporting food, greenhouse gas emissions, and there's a lot that we can actually address at the mitigation level. And at the adaptation level, obviously things have to change. There is more extreme weather events, irregular rainfall patterns, more pests and diseases to which the production systems have to adapt. So really, I see it as a reason for, there is a real case for action. We've heard it at the COP26. We hear it and see it and feel it in our work, I believe, every day. And now the question is, where do the women factor in? And I think this is where it really becomes cross-sectional, which is the fact that if you look at who the poorest people in the world are, out of those 1.3 billion living under poverty conditions, 70% are women. When you look at who the groups of people are that are most dependent on natural resources for their livelihoods, it's women. They tend to have fewer occupational options, less mobility than men, and are therefore very reliant on the existence of these natural resources. And then if you look at more statistics around natural disasters, women are more likely to die, 14 times more than men, to die from a natural disaster or leading to prostitution, to domestic abuse, to human trafficking due to these stress situations that occur after natural disasters. So I think the urgency is there. And now I'm going to go to our work that we're doing. So I work for the Water and Energy for Food initiative. It's a multi-donor initiative, and what we are thinking, or what the basis of our initiative is that we work with the private sector and through the private sector to drive adaptation and mitigation. That we promote climate-friendly, climate-smart, and resource-efficient innovations for food and agriculture through the private sector. And so we're really at this junction of gender, agriculture, and climate change. Just to give you some example, we work with some companies that are working in the solar irrigation space. This paired with advisory services around soil testing, around smart water management, is a way to adapt to the changing weather patterns, for example. We're also working with companies that are pioneering different forms of agricultural practices and production systems, such as hydroponics or smart greenhouses that can be used in areas where resources are scarce. Also, the shift towards organic fertilizer. If we're looking at ammonia manufacturing, that contributes 1 to 2% of worldwide carbon dioxide emissions. If we manage to produce organic fertilizer based on organic matter locally, we are saving a lot of greenhouses, and especially ammonia, which is one of the reasons why agriculture is such a big emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. So we are working already with SMEs that are climate forward. And now the gender aspect comes in. Immediately we would think of a head count, right? How many of these businesses are women-led? How many of these businesses are managed by women? And we also have an indicator on this in our programming. But it's a little bit more than this. Within a business, there's a lot that can be done beyond, having a person assigned to working on gender or mainstreaming gender, or just being owned, even though that's a great achievement. It's not just being owned by a woman. It's also about how inclusivity is considered in the design of products, in sales, in marketing, in the distribution, in how customer services are provided. And it can also be part of the internal policies of an SME, like subsidizing child support or promoting equal pay between men and women. So it's even a step further in terms of internalizing gender inclusive policies. And there's some things that can be done at a small level, at a low level, which is without much impact. So really, a company always asks themselves, so who are the end users of our products? Why not immediately consider the women? So how would that help the women, either in the product design or in terms of how the marketing happens? It happens in the beauty industry. It happens in other industries very much. So how do you target products to women? Just to give you an example, in solar irrigation, we've noticed that if women have smartphones, they are extremely happy if they can control the irrigation systems remotely. They are big advocates of these apps that they literally have an on and off switch and see the performance of the irrigation system, because in the morning when the sun is low and when normally you would have to go to the field to set up the system, turn it on, this is whilst taking care of the children, preparing breakfast, etc. There's a simple solution which helps in time management. It's small things like this that can really make a difference in also how the uptake of technologies is being done, but also other things. For example, to use female sales representatives or trainers for women or with women. To give you an example, we are working with an association of female engineers and electricians in Kenya. They're called WISE, and they are women. And on one hand, I think there is in some ways a more engaged response by the trainees and the trainers if they are all women. But also it sets a standard for the industry. The energy sector is very male dominated, and to have women, just normalizing the presence of female engineers there, that it's just engineers at the end of the day. Those are the steps we can really take. And just to wrap it up, so this is really on the SME side. I think the other two aspects that need to be considered is the investment side, so the investment lens on gendering. There we are trying in our own programming to work with partners, for example, like the Alpha Mundi Foundation, that have a gender lens investment criteria. So they are really looking at, are these female-led or owned businesses? Who are the customers that they're reaching? And how is it enabling these customers to either get access to finance or to grow in their own businesses after all, or in their own livelihoods? And the other part is access to finance for women, which is also an area where we are working on, because a lot of times, 43% worldwide of women are working in agriculture, but 20% of women are less likely to have access to a formal bank account, 17% less likely than men to take a formal loan. So there's there's a significant market gap in how these women are addressed and catered to, whilst at the same time the response rate in terms of performing loans and payback rates, in terms of women controlling capital, these options are significant. And so we're also working with microfinance institutions to really develop microloans that also enable women to access finance. Yeah, that's from me. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Lucy. I think you touched upon multiple important things, and not the least being the importance of handing the control back to the women in terms of having a say in any initiative towards climate adaptation, given that it affects them the most. And it's good to see that SMEs are receiving the support that they require in making sure that their products are oriented towards women. And who better to build on that than an enterprise itself. So I'll come directly to Dorcas. Dorcas, please tell us about Farm Kiosk.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much once again. My name is Dorcas Asimwe. I'm from Uganda. I am the co-founder of Farm Kiosk and act as Chief of Operations currently. Farm Kiosk is an agribusiness social enterprise that is using a mobile app and a web portal to reach out to the last mile rural smallholder farmers across Uganda. Currently, we are operating in 7 districts, and Farm Kiosk has a mobile app that has a profiling feature that profiles different people in different districts. For example, we have a feature that profiles mainly women and the different women groups. For example, in the 7 districts we are operating in, we have about 120 women farmer groups. And within these 120 women farmer groups, we have about 25 to 30 women in each farmer group. So the profiling helps us to know the needs of these women and some of the challenges they face. For example, as you know, agriculture employs the biggest labor force in my country. And in agriculture, particularly, it employs about 76% of the women. So the women are engaged more in the production phase of agriculture, and yet when it comes to the marketing and selling the produce, they have little say about it. It's the men that actually determine where to sell, whom to sell to. So with our profiling feature, we help these women to solve some of their key pressing issues. For example, fake inputs, and we profile certified input dealers that give genuine input, agricultural inputs such as seeds, fertilizers, and all of the like. So we help them in one way or the other. Some of the challenges we face are internet connectivity in the different parts of the country that is beyond our means. So, but we try as much as we can. Currently, we are developing a mobile app, a feature in the mobile app that allows us to profile farmers offline. So, so we can partly solve the issue of internet connectivity in the different rural areas. Then the women also are a bit illiterate when it comes to using these technologies. So that means we have to do more of the digital literacy trainings. We profile also financial service people that come and teach these women about savings and how to best plan for their farms and so that they can maximize productivity and production. Farm Kiosk also helps we use the village agent model where we profile aggregators in the different villages where we get to know the prevailing available produce in the different locations. For example, we receive an alert on the system. For example, in this particular district, there are 10 tons of maize. So we help find markets for these 10 tons of maize. Where there is need, we help them to reach out to processors, and we encourage them to do value addition so they can increase their incomes. What we look out for is mainly mentorship on how we can best use our innovation, and also networking. If we can get to connect with the experts in the sector, in the agriculture sector, who can help us reach out more to our target clients, who are the rural farmers and smallholder farmers in particular. Thank you so much. That's it for now. In case there is any question, I'll be glad to answer.
Sure. Thanks a lot for that, Dorcas. And I think you touched upon, multiple things that are very important to women farmers, quality inputs, access to markets, access to networking opportunities. So these are the things that we keep hearing again and again as something that are imperative for women to have. And I will come back to you a little later to hear a little bit about what impact you have been able to have on these women and how can this really be scaled. But before that, I would love to come to Agnes. And Agnes, it will be great to hear from you about the investor's perspective and talk about Root Capital's approach to investing with a gender lens.
Thank you, Amma. And good morning, everyone. I'm also calling from Kenya, Nairobi. And my name is Agnes Manthi. I'm in charge of business development in the Africa continent. And therefore that comes with a lot of, what we are talking about, finding those women businesses, what are their needs, how can we work with them? And therefore going into what we do. So like a number of you may know, or majority of you may know, Root Capital is an impact investor, and we invest in the growth of agricultural enterprises so that they can transform their rural communities. And we provide them with capital and advisory services. And of course, we are very much aware and very intentional to also address some of these cross-cutting issues like women, youth, and as well as climate issues. So how do we then work with women, particularly, even before we can talk about climate, I will talk about the two. So how do we ensure then we are including women in what we do? So first and foremost, in agriculture, we target specific value chains, and we're very intentional in, conducting research in those value chains that we have, a very strong representation of women, either as farmers or as entrepreneurs themselves, or as playing, any role within the value chain. So we are very, very intentional when we are doing some of this research. We don't just go to the specific value chains that perhaps have a higher return, but we are also keen on those value chains that have a strong representation of women. And because, again, what we have seen over time is those particular value chains where women play a very significant role, there's also a lot of impact. And therefore, we get very intentional on that and bring on board or include those value chains in our portfolio. Secondly, we develop financial products that are very, very specific to women or addressing some of the women needs. For example, we may come up with a financing product, and we have that addresses, internal credit funds. And so that the women enterprises can have a fund that they can on lend to their farmers. And again, majority of them, you will find that they are women, to be able to address some of their either productivity needs on the farm, or even other issues that they may have at home. 3, we also do tailor-made training specific for women, at the enterprise level and also at the farmer level. Of course, Root Capital, we target agricultural enterprises. That is where intervention is. But when it comes to the farmers, then we use, the staff of these enterprises, to be able to carry out the trainings of the farmers. And then fourthly, we have also gender equity grants. We have specific grants that are addressing gender equity issues. And so these are grants that will provide these enterprises with funding that they can implement specific gender inclusion and now climate resilience, initiatives. And so we involve these businesses in coming up, with what are their needs when it comes to gender issues and what are their needs when it comes to climate issues. And then together we design those initiatives with them. And then we give them these grants to be able to implement, those initiatives. Some of these grants, for example, will be around adding compost to soil that addresses the issues of climate. It will also be an issue to do with the shade trees, as a mitigation strategy. And also, coming up with gender policies, to ensure that then they have, inclusivity within their business. And also, some of them even go ahead and come up with board committees that are specifically addressing gender issues. So some of these activities that I'm talking about, we've been able to do them, successfully in Latin America. And then now going into the next phase, that is what we plan to do in Africa. And we're in the middle of discussion of how that is going to happen, in Africa, especially on the climate issues. Those are more done in Latin America, but now we are beginning to talk about how we want to do the same, in Africa. We are actually kind of understanding what are the needs of our clients here when it comes to climate issues and gender, and then we can be able to see how to intervene or to help our businesses implement some of these things. So that's where we are, Amma. I am glad to talk more about, what we look at it, going forward. But just quickly, something else that I need to say is, we also have metrics. We have defined metrics, to be able to determine this is a gender inclusive business. This is a women-led business. We have very specific metrics around that. And we also have a gender scorecard so that we can be able to monitor, the progress on some of these metrics and how these businesses are transforming from our trainings and those other initiatives they are doing. Of course, some of the things we monitor will be the percentage of women farmers, percentage of women managers in the enterprises, percentage of women staff generally, or how many businesses are women-led and all that. So yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks a lot for that, Agnes. And you did speak about, value chains, and I would love to hear more about your experience in specific value chains and what kind of support is required. Actually, also from Lucy, we would love to hear that. But before we get there, I would just request Karnika to come in. Karnika leads Intellicap's gender and livelihoods work in Africa. And Karnika, any thoughts from your side about this topic?
Yeah, thanks everyone for a very interesting discussion so far. And as Niharika and Amar mentioned initially, this session is aligned to the work that we are doing with the IDRC Canada, International Development Research Center. And as we were conceptualizing this work, there were some of the things that were like at the core of our thought process. The one being that yes, women are at the center of the agricultural value chain, agricultural sector across Africa. 50% of the workforce in agriculture sector in Africa comprises of women. But at the same time, agriculture sector is also one of the biggest contributor to the greenhouse emissions. So we thought if we are able to tackle this nexus of issue, agriculture and women and climate change, it will be a very interesting problem to solve, to see how women economic empowerment can be done while also transitioning to the low carbon world. And that's how we conceptualize this program that we are currently executing with IDRC. And as we were doing more research for this project, what we also identified that, as I previously mentioned, that yes, women do contribute to a large proportion of the workforce, but at the same time, a lot of research has shown that women farmers are less productive as compared to the men. And that does not mean that women the productivity is less because they are less efficient, but because they have less access to inputs, they have less access to land, they have less access to finance, and which ultimately result in them being able to produce less as compared to the male counterparts. And so while we work on making the agriculture sector more climate adapted and involving more women in these, and that to up the value chain, there is also a need that the whole approach is private sector driven, so that it is sustainable in a long-term basis, and it actually leads to the tangible economic empowerment of the women. And that's why, like, the role of these climate smart businesses, which some Lucy also mentioned about soil testing businesses, solar irrigation pumps, or even the other businesses like agri-processors, commercial agri-processors, likes of the Mero Greens and all those things, they can also play a very significant role in greening the agriculture sector while also creating livelihood opportunities for the women. And then that's sort of a thought process that led us to this. And we believe that, yes, working with the private sector, it can actually lead to the tangible economic empowerment for the women, and women need to and can play a very central role in the climate change adaptation across Africa. Back to you, Amar.
All right, thanks a lot for that, Kanika. So Lucy, coming back to you, I mean, basis what we heard from Agnes, any thoughts on gender mainstreaming specifically in the businesses that you work with, and what are some of the value chains that you see hold most potential, or any other attribute that you have come across?
Mm-hmm. It's, as we said, a bit of a cross-sectional issue, right? So the value chains women are involved in might not necessarily be the ones that have the potential for high value crops, for example. And so there is this balance between looking at value chains where women are already involved and how to optimize that. And then there is also looking at how to get women more involved or to take a greater role in other value chains. It really depends a bit on the country. I think it depends on where we are talking about. We've looked a lot into tea and the role of tea pluckers, producers, but then also factory workers. Tea is still in East Africa one of the biggest cash crops, and so to just have more women also in the value addition involved is key. we've also worked especially around sort of at cooperative level or a SACCO level. SACCO is a savings group level, or later on at sort of processing level, to work specifically with women groups that are like, for example, to set up cold storage solutions, just to preserve and be able to transport and store fruit and vegetables, which are higher value, or fish even, to achieve a premium on the market. And those are sort of the interventions, I think, that really help. It's value addition, and processing, I think, that really we are focusing on. So you can produce and then you make more with it.
Got it. Thanks a lot for that, Lucy. Coming back to Agnes, and I think we also have a question related to this in the chat. If you could share a little bit more about some of the metrics and the gender scorecard that you mentioned earlier, I think that would be great. And then I have one more follow-up question about just the successes and failures of some of these businesses. But maybe we can come to that a little later.
Okay. So for the metrics, so women or gender inclusive businesses are those with a woman entrepreneur or a manager, with a significant ownership stake. So it could be the owner of the business, or it could be, one of the directors or a manager, but then they have a significant representation in the board. But then again, we also know that is limiting, and therefore we go further and say, if a business then can make up 30% plus of the farmers, the farmers, the women are 30%, or all the employees can make up 30%, then that would also qualify as a gender inclusive business. And where a woman leads, then we take that lower and say 20%, because you may find a business that is led by a man. So we always want to say then, can we check whether 30% of the farmers are women, or plus employees are women? But then where it is woman-led or owned, then we are saying we put that ratio lower to 20%, because already the woman is the owner. In terms of the scorecard, of course, it's just a question of monitoring, month to month, the number of women farmers, the number of women managers, because they keep on changing. And of course, once we bring a business on board, we also train them on the need, to be very gender sensitive. And every time they're recruiting or they're bringing board members, then they need to take care of the gender, balances. And by the way, we also do the same within ourselves as Root Capital. It's not just our clients, even ourselves as we bring in new staff. We also look at the women farmers as well, the women board of directors, the existence of women, women forward-looking initiatives, like either they may have, a children's care center, like some of our clients really came up with a children's care center. So as the women come to work in some of the processing factories, then they have a care center where their children, these young ones, they have someone who can take care of them, and therefore they can keep on checking their children, other than leaving them at home and then, not being settled in their office because they are thinking about their children, have they had food? And it's even worse when they are sick, because they're wondering, have they taken the medicine and everything? But now they can bring them together with the food, together with the medicine, and they have one person, that can take care of them as they work. And during the breaks, they can check on their children, which works very well. And the younger ones who are in school and they are not able to go home and, be on their own, they can come to the enterprise. They can stay at the children's day, care center, and then they can go home with their mothers in the evening when they finish work. So some of these initiatives are tailor-made to each client, depending on the needs that, they identify, and then we help them to come up with those initiatives through the grants. there was a question around what we look at. So in terms of financing, definitely we will look at some of those metrics, even for women, about 2 years of operational, operational as a business. We are also looking at, having reliable supply chains, and it's those supply chains that we keep on checking whether women are included, and as well also, reliable markets. We know some of these metrics are very hard to have, and that's why Root Capital doesn't just give financing alone, but we have the advisory services to help some of these businesses that are not ready, for loans or for borrowing, to help them to become investment ready, perhaps in a year or so. So that is one of the questions I saw on the chat, but I will still respond there. And then just adding on to what Lucia said, some of these value chains where we have strong representation of women are not the high value, value chains. They are value chains mostly in food crops. That's where you find a lot of women, getting involved. And as Root Capital, our core value chains definitely are the high value ones like coffee, cocoa, and nuts. Those are high value. We also see women, playing there, but not as much as the food crops. And therefore, we are also targeting certain food crops within East Africa because of that gender component, and as well as also helping these businesses address some of the climate issues. I'll give a good example. One value chain we work in is sorghum. Sorghum, we all know it's a drought-resistant crop, and therefore we have helped, some of these communities to move from planting, crops like maize and move on to sorghum, which gives them income, and then they can be able to afford food, other than planting maize and then they cannot harvest because of the low rainfall that we have noticed within the region. Yeah.
All right. Thanks for that, Agnes. And as you rightly said, there often is a lot of pre-work that is required even before investors.
Okay, I suppose we have lost Amar for some minutes, his internet issues, as he is coming back. Maybe just quickly, if Lucy or Agnes will also like to pick up this thing, that currently there is a lot of capital flowing as capital in the form of climate finance. And maybe particularly this question to Lucy, you will have seen like a lot of donors and funders are also channeling capital in the form of climate finance across Africa. Do you think that climate finance should also have an additional lens of gender? And have you seen that climate finance now started to flow as a gender with a gender lens as well? Any thoughts on that?
For sure. This is really also the pot to tap into. I can share later on. There's actually quite a few things happening at the moment. Maybe just I can post some links on this. There's, for example, the Siemens Foundation that are now giving out grants to, in this case, female entrepreneurs for the green economy. So SMEs in the broader sense, active in the green economy. We have now setting up an accelerator, or we call it a boot camp, for climate adaptation specific companies to then look into basically leveraging a private finance. So it's not just the public funds, but it's really the private funds that are quite interesting for a lot of SMEs. And if that, yes, I would say that for sure there should be and could be an angle on gender, be it a full program on it or sort of a quota. A lot of times, as I said, we are also trying to look at this holistic approach. So it's not just women-led and women-owned, but really also looking how can these SMEs become gender transformative in their action. And I think it's also about coaching and about providing a bit of seed funding to then make larger changes within the companies.
Okay, thanks a lot for that, Lucy. And I see Amar is back as well. Amar?
Yeah, thanks,
Back to
Kandika.
you.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I hope you can hear me now. So I'm not sure at what point I dropped off, but I was essentially coming to Dorcas, and I wanted to hear from her about Farm Kiosk's journey in mainstreaming gender and how it came about. Was it always the intention, or was it a process of discovery?
Thank you so much. When we were starting, it was not part of the agenda, but with time we got to realize, yes, we need to be gender sensitive, we need to be gender aware and create awareness about this. I'll give an example. When we started out in the communities, we realized that women were not engaging in activities such as agroforestry. They could not plant trees. Why? Because this was a long-term project, and the women in cultures, they do not own land. So they were afraid to engage in such long-term projects. And these long-term projects are of agroecological importance when it comes to climate change and mitigation. So we reached out and created awareness. We did sensitization. And as I speak currently, there's a very, very big improvement. Women are engaging in agroforestry. There is reduced post-harvest losses. And now women can actually, there's an increase in their income. Yeah, so it was not part of the agenda, but yes, we realized this is important and we need to act immediately. There are different testimonies. I'm going to share a link in the chat where you can reach and get to know some of these testimonies we've been able to get from our different people in the field.
All right. Thanks a lot for that, Dorcas. And I think I'm very mindful of time, and I think we are now going to go into breakout rooms. I think what we've heard from the panelists was very useful, and I think it's going to inform our discussion, where we would love to hear from all of you, people in the audience, about your take on the shifting roles of women in agriculture, food systems, specifically in Africa due to climate change. What are some of the areas within agriculture that hold the most potential for gender impact, and what support would be available or is required to help private sector enterprises, reorient themselves. All right, so I hope it was an engaging conversation in the three rooms. I think I was in room one, and two important things that really came out from our conversation were the importance of collaboration and co-opting the stakeholders that we are working with, essentially the enterprises and the ultimate women beneficiaries, to ensure that any intervention is designed with them at the center. And I think both of these really speak very strongly to what has been discussed earlier. And I need not talk about collaboration sitting at Sankalp, because this is a space especially for collaboration, and it's good to see that that's happening in spirit. So I'll just pause there. Any thoughts from the other two rooms? Would anybody like to volunteer to summarize what was discussed?
Yeah, anybody else from the room too wants to go ahead to share their thoughts, or else I can? Okay, maybe before I also go in, because just before we were getting back to the room, one of the participants in the room, Edward, had a very, very valid point. So before I summarize, Edward, do you want to make your comment that you were just making as we were closing the breakout rooms?
Yeah, I was saying, I mean, we could speak about all these innovations and technologies, but I think the most important thing for the African farmer is really to be able to access markets. I like what the lady said, that they are changing some of these commodities from maize to sorghum because there's more market in the sorghum space. So I think if we have to address issues of climate smart agriculture, or we have to speak about innovation and technologies, I think then we start with markets so that we're able to inform our farmers that there's market for certain commodities. And once they get those markets, then they can start now implementing they can start implementing things to do with climate smart in agriculture. They can start doing climate adaptation strategies and so on and so forth. So I think markets has been the big issue in African agriculture. We have smallholder farmers. If you walk around the country, really, you don't see much happening apart from very specific supply chain commodities. But we don't have markets that are progressive. We don't have markets for animals. that are very defined and structured. We don't have very good markets for maize. We don't have good markets for sugar sector. So there's a problem. We need to address the issue of markets. Once we start addressing the issue of markets, then we can now start implementing innovation and technology, climate smart strategies, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Edward, for that. And yeah, definitely there is a need for sort of collaboration and streamlining the markets and providing the markets to the farmers, smallholder farmers, so that they learn, and then they can also then start adopting climate smart innovation and technologies. So more collaboration is needed, as also previously mentioned by Amar, as was the discussion in the other group. The other things, just quickly to summarize, some of the other things that were also mentioned in our breakout room were around that the work that is being done in the gender space, particularly with the private sector businesses, needs to be more deliberate and intentional to see the real impact on the ground. For instance, the local county governments, local governments, national, regional governments need to also get involved in these discussions so that the difference can be seen at the grassroots level. And the other thing that was also discussed was that preserving the local and the sort of indigenous knowledge base that has been existent across for various decades and decades in the agricultural sector in Africa, and using and building on these climate smart practices on the traditional knowledge, the local indigenous knowledge that already exists, so that the sector is more sustainable and also conducive to the local environment and the local practices as such. And the other thing that was discussed was around the importance of the policy and how private sector needs to play an important role in the policy development, and then how, for instance, the Ministry of Gender needs to speak with the Ministry of Agriculture, with the Ministry of Environment, so that all the policies are speaking to each other and working towards the common goal, and rather than not aligned to each other. So yeah, these were some of the important, interesting discussion points that were there in the breakout room number 2.
Yeah, thanks for that, Karnika. Anything from room number 3? Niharika or anybody else?
Right when we got moved out of the breakouts, Peter was sharing his thoughts about some of the gaps in the sector. So Peter, will you want to complete your thoughts on that?
All right, thank you. So my name is Peter. My thought was in regards to the gaps, because I work with Agnes at Root Capital, and I share with what my previous speakers talked about market, because market is very critical component in the value chain. So for me, women is just to help them to strengthen their market, and to add on the innovation part is to be creative. Yeah, because if they come up with their own product, they package it as a women kind of manufactured product. An example is the women coffee cooperatives we've had in Rwanda. They produce their own coffee, they market it as women produced coffee, and they're really getting good market. So it's just about being creative, getting more from less, and thinking outside the box. This one will also help them to get empowered and get out of that cultural, I don't know which term to use, but they always believe that they are weaker than men, right? So it's just for them to build that confidence in them, right? So the final one is for the technical advisors, is also to help them come up with programs that will be able to create more leadership among the women, to have a program where they'll have young women leaders. So this mentorship, coaching will also be able to create sustainability and have more women in pipeline. So that's just my thought. Thank you very much, Amar.
Apart from what we've just heard from Peter, the other things that we discussed in breakout room 3 were that there's a huge gap within agriculture in terms of gender involvement. specifically in the primary processing or value addition phase. And it may be relevant for the countries to have policies around that and involving more women in technical work. Also, in terms of the marketing aspect, more women need to be involved, because what is seen across the sector is that money is mostly controlled by the man, even though women are involved in selling at the farm gate a lot of times. In terms of the gap, the biggest gap that was highlighted is in terms of financing. And the audience shared that it may be relevant to have more gender related products which will help women in the sector. And any solutions to engage more women need to be cognizant about not overlapping with women's existing roles at homes, because that is where a large part of the challenge comes in from. Also, in terms of enterprises, while they see that there are gaps in terms of where women are involved in the business and where they are not, the least they can do is to ensure to have those specific percentages or specific cutoffs, so that even if they don't have the equal women to men ratio in the operations, they can at least have a minimum representation of women across the different segments of their business. That's all.
All right. All right. Thanks for that, Niharika. There seem to have some, very fruitful discussions in these rooms. And I would just like to mention here that please feel free to continue either connecting one-on-one virtually, or I don't know how many of you are attending on Friday, but in person as well. We also have our Brella platform. So please feel free to use it to network with whoever you want to connect with. I know that we don't have a whole lot of time left, but what I would like to do before we close is to hear from our panelists a little bit about what change you would like to already have happened by the time we are here next year again for Sankalp, and what message would you give to stakeholders to effect that change. So if we could hear you reflect on that, that will be great. Maybe Lucy or Agnes, would you like to go first?
Maybe just to say, I think next year around, we probably have a few more better documented case studies and business cases for why it makes sense to either reflect gender, become more gender inclusive in your operations, or also to work with women, either in terms of access to finance or as customers.
All right. Thanks for that, Lucy. Agnes?
And for me, just to echo Edward, I think is to perhaps hear where governments have, are involved in the policy or have come up with policies. First and foremost, to kind of regulate some of these agricultural value chains, because I'll tell you for free why maybe you see a lot more private sector doesn't get involved where women are, is because, most of these agricultural value chains, like Edward said, there's no market, there's no what. A lot more of them are not, there's no policy around them, and therefore they're so informal and very risky for investments. And so people try to get involved where there's a bit of formality, but where there's no formality, then people are shying away from that. So if we can, have more engagements with the government, just to make sure then we get some of these governments to have some policies around some of these value chains where women are significantly involved, I think for me, that would be a good thing.
All right, great. Thanks for that, Agnes. Dorcas, anything from your side?
Yes, for the next summit, we hope that there'll be more uptake of these climate smart farming approaches. And we hope that there'll be the policies and the structures that are currently available will be reviewed and adjusted. Yes, and we hope to see more women benefit from agriculture. Yes, we are advocating for that. And we hope by the next summit, we'll have testimonies and bigger testimonies.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot for that, Dorcas. That's it from our side. I think this was a great panel, and I think some of the discussions are definitely worth pondering on even as we go away from this panel. Sankalp continues for the next 2-3 days, so please feel free to interact with everybody. And thank you again for all your time. And with this, I close this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, everyone, and have a good day.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good day. Bye-bye.